In this one, I'll be talking about the Canadian military's Trillium Venture Exercise once again, and the questions I have, as well as what I've learned, and the experiences with the Canadian military and the phone calls that I made. So, first, going to start off by reading this from 31 Canadian Brigade Group. I would like to take some time to explain our upcoming Trillium Venture exercise and answer questions we have been receiving about it. This exercise is run every year and is done to help develop the skills required to Canadians in emergency situations such as floods, fires, or extreme weather. Provincial and territorial authorities are the first to respond when a major natural disaster occurs in Canada. If they become overwhelmed, they may ask the Canadian Armed Forces for help. When the Canadian Armed Forces responds to such a crisis, it is known as Operation Lentis. The province or territory sends the federal government a request for assistance, including requests for the use of Canadian Armed Forces support. We're also developing the skills required to support and serve alongside our federal, provincial, territorial, and municipal partners, such as the police, firefighters, and EMS. The primary objective is to help provincial and local authorities stabilize emergency situations and to reassure residents in affected areas. We will be going door to door to talk with residents and hand out information from the county regarding extreme weather precautions. If this was a real emergency situation, we would be tasked to check on residents to make sure you are okay and have the essentials. During Operation Lentis, when the Canadian Armed Forces is responding to natural disasters in Canada in support of civilian authorities, one of the important tasks that we undertake are community wellness checks. It is through personal interaction with community members that we get to know more about the needs of the people and where we can be of help. It also offers an opportunity to share information about safety and security to help them protect themselves. While on training exercise Trillium Venture, our troops will be practicing common tasks related to Operation Lentis, such as wellness checks, to ensure that we're always prepared to provide best possible help we can extend to Canadians. The wellness check during this training will involve no collection of information, and soldiers will not ask you any private health questions. This is entirely voluntary and is more a chance for residents to meet the soldiers and for us to deliver the information the county wishes you to have. If you do not want to answer the door, that is your choice, but the soldiers will leave the information from the county for you to review at your leisure. Also, if there is a no trespassing sign clearly visible at the entry to the property, then we will respect it and move along. We are deploying a minimum of 250 kilometers from each garrison to demonstrate our ability to force, generate, and deploy a significant distance away from the home units in response to a domestic emergency. This is also being run in conjunction with the county's emergency preparedness exercise and will allow us to develop the relationships we would need should we be called upon to provide assistance. Residents can expect to see convoys of military soldiers on public roads and are encouraged again to interact with soldiers conducting training in and around their communities. Residents are welcome to speak to soldiers whom they encounter about their role in the exercise. The exercise is to train for domestic response and assistance, so the soldiers won't be carrying any weapons or ammunition of any kind. Also, the firefighting training you will see is tailored for fighting large-scale wildfires, since those are the ones the military is called upon to help fight. So lastly, this is being done on the weekend because we are a reserve force, with most of our soldiers being either students or having regular jobs. This means that the weekends are the optimal and only time we can conduct training of this nature. And this is from Public Affairs Officer 31 Canadian Brigade Group, the Canadian Armed Forces. And 31 Canadian Brigade Group was dealing with the Bruce and Huron County. There's also 32 and 33 brigade group, but that was already talked about in previous videos, which will be linked in the description and the territories that they cover. So this is the first phone call on May the 1st to Lieutenant Paul Verhey, which is the public affairs officer that I just mentioned. So first question I ask is, what do the reserves plan on asking people when doing wellness checks? Paul says he can only speak to his brigade, which is a 31 Canadian Brigade group, and cannot speak to what's going on in Mattawa and other communities. He assumes that what they'll be asking is along the same line. They're not asking anything in particular. The soldiers are out there to engage with citizens in order to inform them about what's going on in the community, what they're doing, and how they're doing it, as well as, in our case, as it may differ in other areas. We've been given some information from the county to provide residents for preparedness, such as emergency contact, stuff of that nature, just as like reading material, so that if something were to happen, you had phone numbers or something that you could call to get aid or assistance. But our main focus is to be out there engaging with citizens, answering the questions that they may have when they see soldiers in their community and what they're doing and so on. So he assumes what they'll be asking is along the same line and says they're not asking anything in particular. So that is a contradiction in and of itself. He's definitely all over the place and not consistent. And to say that you assume the brigades are asking the same types of things and to say they're not asking anything in particular definitely sounds a little bit fishy, for sure. And why wouldn't the reading material just be mailed out to people through Canada Post? That would have actually saved lots of money also, so I wonder how much money was actually wasted on this exercise in particular. I also asked if there was a questionnaire or any guidelines or directions for the soldiers, or if there is any sort of documentation or forms. He says no. So we're not taking any information down. We're not reporting anything. There's nothing for you to fill out. No surveys, no medical information being asked. The soldier comes to your door, knocks on your door, and you do not wish to speak to them. They will leave. No ifs, ands, or buts, he says. And if you have a no trespassing sign on your property, they will not enter your property, along with a do not knock sign or some other sign on your door that indicates that you don't wish to be disturbed. And he also says, as I said, this is a completely voluntary type of activity on the part of the residents. It is more just to inform you, as part of our mandate. It is our job to ensure that the public is informed about what we're doing, why we're doing things. So this is one of those types of things that we do. This is so you don't want to engage. It's totally up to you, and we will leave. But this is more just to explain about what soldiers are doing in your community and the types of activities you would see. So, once again, he assumes what they'll be asking is along the same line, but they're not asking anything in particular, going back to his first response to my first question, which is, once again, all over the place. So, and then when I ask about retirement homes and if they're relocating or removing elderly from their homes or their retirement homes, he says, so the scenario itself, like, we just needed a scenario in which to play by. So in extreme heat is the one in which was chosen by our community, by the county itself, because we're running our exercise in conjunction with them. So that's just the exercise that they picked. In terms of removing of residents from long-term care facilities and such, what is actually happening is we are going to have people going in and speaking with the management of those homes about how it would be done. There's nothing, nobody's getting moved, nobody's being inconvenienced or handled in any way, shape, or form, or even asked to leave the building. We are simply going into the homes at the request, the management's request, to talk about how the evacuation would occur should one be requested. So if the retirement facility has, say, lost all its power and they couldn't maintain the building because the power was out, so they didn't have, any AC, or for the residents, they were running out of water, stuff like that, how could we help facilitate and they had deemed, say, their personnel needed to be moved to a different location to ensure their quality of life, we would make sure. Or you're going in there to speak with them about how that would take place. Nobody is getting removed. It is a simulation, and it is all a simulation, and it is all, and the residents may not even know we're there, he says. So the fact that he says community and then says county definitely puts this whole thing into question. And also, the fact of the matter, like I explored in the previous video, the public did not have input in this exercise whatsoever. And if nobody's getting moved, inconvenienced, or handled in any way, shape, or form, what about the heart problems that elderly people may have, like dementia, especially when he says that the residents may not even know we're there? That's really taking a big chance, and they may see through their window or even in the foyer. So that would definitely alarm people, and elderly people, once again, with heart problems, dementia, and that kind of a thing. You're actually just posing a significant risk to elderly people. And so then I mentioned that the county chose the heat scenario, so who is he referring to? And I asked who made the decision, whether it was local politicians or the OPP, and he mentions that Huron and Bruce County is the county. Said we made the decision to consult with local politicians, so he means everybody. And he also mentions quote unquote everybody, but isn't really specific, as everything is really on a need to know basis, so to speak, within the Canadian military, and probably any military force for that matter. He says, so we had a meeting with Bruce and Huron County officials separately, and at that meeting we had OPP represented, we had fire department, local fire departments represented, we had EMS services, anybody interacting in this scenario we were in contact with, had meetings with. All the scheduling had been done with them, because the fact is that the military were requested to come and provide aid. When we come to provide that aid, we don't take over any situation. We are there to provide personnel, equipment, and training to that situation. We're not taking over any situation. There is no, we are to aid civil power and to civil services, so we would fall under the direction of the OPP or fire department. But again, like the firefighting that is stated that we are going to be training for is more for wildfires. It's not for residential fires. We train for wildfires, not to put out house fires. So I asked when the meeting was, where he mentioned county officials, OPP, fire department, and EMS. And he says, so the earliest one that I was like a participant at, I don't know if ones were done further. I believe they were, but I can't give you a date on that. But January was the first one that I was a participant at. So this was a closed door meeting, and he wasn't sure if there was more than one meeting. So once again, transparency is somewhat lacking there. And I asked if the meeting was public, and he goes, I don't know if the meeting was made public. It was like an open forum. We told the county knew we were coming. Once again, that doesn't really signify anything revolving around transparency at all. So I asked if the United Nations in any way was involved in this exercise, and there was a nice 2-second pause, and he just quickly says, nope. So then, my next question, Josh Major, who's the general, General Josh Major, who's the commander of 4th Division. I had gone over him a little bit in my previous videos, which will be linked in the description. So the commander of 4th Division is part of Joint Task Force Central, which is one of the 6 joint task forces, which all falls under the command of Joint Operations Command, who align with the United Nations. So I asked if Vice Admiral Bob Osterloni of Joint Operations Command is a part of Trillium Venture. He says General Major is responsible for everything that happens and is in charge of it, but as for the Admiral, no, he is not. So I ask if this exercise is overseen in any way by Canadian Joint Operations Command. He says, in what way? I say, in what way? The fact that Josh Major is part of Joint Task Force Central, which is part of the makeup of what Canadian Joint Operations Command is, right? So why don't you tell me in what way they would be involved if they are? He goes, I'm trying to understand your question, sir. I don't understand your question. And he goes on to explain that 31 Canadian Brigade Group is part of 4th Division, and each brigade, 31, 32, and 33, is each running their section. So I go, if the 3 brigades are part of 4th Division, which is led by General Josh Major, who is part of Joint Task Force Central, which is one of the 6 Joint Task Forces, and the Joint Task Forces are part of the anatomy of Canadian Joint Operations Command, what I'm asking is, what role does Joint Operations Command play in this exercise? Do you follow? He goes, so I think I follow what you're asking. So while they're aware of the exercise, like they aren't playing a role, like 4th Division is responsible to ensure its troops are prepared to respond in a domestic situation if we are called upon to provide assistance. That's part of our mandate and responsibilities, so that is what we are tasked to do, and that is what we are doing. There are no other entities participating in this. I ask, would you grant me the contact information for Division Commander Josh Major? He goes, no, not that I won't. It's just that I don't have it, he says. It would be pretty easy to provide me with that, but anyway, moving forward. I ask, how would I obtain it? He says I could reach out to 4th Division directly and they can provide you with that. Like I can do that too, but any citizen can look that up and ask for contact. So then I ask if there are any questions that involve mental health, firearms, or if body bags are present for the exercise. He says, nope, I don't know where you're getting that information, but no questions are being asked other than to see whether residents are going to have any questions about the exercise and what the troops are doing. This is why they're there. That's what they're going to be on hand for, and to provide that information to the citizens and residents. Well, more than one newspaper article said the words of reservists are mainly there to engage with people. So I'm going to pull up that article right here. It says here that it will involve approximately 800 Army reservists and will cover various locations throughout Bruce and Huron counties. The community is encouraged to interact with reservists and, if desired, tour the portable headquarters set up in Blythe, which I'll be talking about some of those things a little bit further on into the video. And so then that concludes the end of the first phone call. And also I want to say as well that with regards to the first phone call, it actually took me 15 minutes to get through to Lieutenant Paul Verhey, which is interesting. They don't make things easy. So this is the second phone call that I make. I make the phone call to 4th Division and end up trying to speak with General Josh Major directly, but I reach out and acquire his assistant, which is Major Pierre Baudry. So first question, I ask if Canadian Joint Operations Command is participating in this exercise or not, and he tries to get me to speak to a public affairs officer 3 times, and by the 3rd time he asks if I want to interview General Josh Major and get a hold of a public affairs officer to do that. And he said he couldn't answer, but he said he could answer, but wasn't sure he was the best person to do it. And he said that 4th Division is the highest headquarters involved in the Trillium Venture Exercise, and says that General Josh Major would not be involved. And I said, so you're saying Josh Major would not be involved in this exercise? He then proceeds to say, nope, that's incorrect. The commander is involved in this exercise. He is the highest level of headquarters that's involved. So that's a direct contradiction from him saying that the general would not be involved. And also, moving forward, I ask if the Vice Admiral, Bob Ostroloni, is involved in the exercise, considering he supersedes General Josh Major. And he says, in the sense that he's aware that it's happening, yes, but he is not directing the exercise. The highest level of headquarters that's involved at our level is Joint Task Force Central, which General Josh Major is part of Joint Task Force Central. That is part of the anatomy of Canadian Joint Operations Command. So JTFC, which I'll be saying for short, is the highest level that's involved. So would that include then, would that mean that you guys are in charge of 31, 32, and 33 Canadian Brigade Group involved in their roles in this exercise? And he says it gets a little bit complex in differentiation as to what is Joint Task Force Central and what is 4th Division. So in terms of deployment, it would fall under JTFC, and those brigades actually fall under 4th Division, but the troops that we take and put on the exercise become a part of territorial battle groups, which then are assigned to Joint Task Force Central. It gets a little bit murky, especially to explain without proper work charts. So for me to kind of loosely explain is the territorial battle group is like basically arranging the types of troops and types of equipment and things required for a particular operation, mission, exercise, and so on and so forth. So I asked who or what department specifically ordered the Trillium Venture Exercise, and he says we are the headquarters that's the controlling authority for the exercise. And I said, if you're the controlling authority for this exercise, did you receive orders from something above, such as Canadian Special Forces Operations Command? Where did the exercise actually come from? And he says, sorry, it's a bit more complex than you're making it out to be. Basically, we are ordered by CJOC, Canadian Joint Operations Command, to ensure that we are ready to respond to domestic operations. And one of the ways that we ensure that we are ready to respond is through conducive exercises. Like our level decided what the exercise looks like, and then going down we get to parameters. The lower level gets stricter parameters is how that works, but like in terms of this specific exercise, it is at our headquarters. So then I ask if JTFC is part of the makeup and anatomy of CJOC. I understand that CJOC works in tandem with organizations such as NATO and the United Nations. Are they involved in this exercise or played a role in setting it up in any way, shape, or form? He says, no, those would be more like an international portion, like internationally part of CJOC, not domestic operations. So then I proceed to ask if 4th Division what ordered the exercise or Joint Task Force Central. And he says the exercise is for training for domestic operations. In his role at Joint Task Force Central, he is running the exercise as Canadian 4th Division. So I asked, do you know where General Josh Major has received his orders for this exercise, if any? And he says his path from CJOC is to ensure that JTFC is to respond to domestic operations. So that doesn't really even answer my question at all. He pretty well dodged it and didn't tell me where the general received his orders from, if he had received any. And so I asked about going into retirement homes and if they're relocating or removing elderly from their homes or retirement homes. And then once again, he says, oh, this will probably be best to talk to a public affairs officer. I'm not intimately involved with the exercise, but I'm aware that one of the brigades is certainly having a planning meeting with the retirement homes, but no one should be moving. So, yeah, once again, a little bit unclear to say the least there. And he tried to shift me to a public affairs officer once again. That's 4 times so far to a public affairs officer. And I said, do you know if any of the patrons are going to be questioned or if it would be the retirement home management? He said it would certainly be the management. And I asked if he has a copy of the questionnaire guidelines for the soldiers that are doing the wellness checks or communicating with the retirement home management. And he says, no, I do not. And I asked if they're giving out any pamphlets or reading material. He says, I don't have that, no. And he tries to bring me once again, number 5, to a public affairs officer. I tell him I intended to speak with the highest level of command, and he tried to bring me to a public affairs officer once again. Basically, what I just want to say on a personal note is that in order to acquire the best detail of an exercise, operation, mission, or anything, why not go to the highest level of command that's involved, or that you know of that's involved, in order to obtain the best answers, not a public affairs officer. Anyway, I asked him if he has any idea that Canadian Special Forces Operations Command is involved in the Trillium Venture exercise. He says that they're not, and that they're a separate Level 1 organization from the Army and Canadian Joint Operations Command. And I asked him if there are any questions involving mental health, firearms, or body bags present for the exercise. He says, nope, there shouldn't be. So this was the date in which I made this phone call was on, just give me 1 second to check. It was May the 3rd in which I had made this phone call, and then May the 4th would be the date that we went to Blythe, and the Trillium Venture exercise is going on from May 3rd to 5th. So this is the first visit to the base in Blythe at the community center on Gypsy Lane, and this is where they have set up their Operations 31 Canadian Brigade group, So Josephine and I went together, and I'm going to give you her bio. It says Josephine LaValle is a Haudenosaunee Onondaga from Six Nations, a certified yoga teacher, a certified Reiki master, and certified Qigong instructor. She resides in the Niagara area in Ontario, and she is a well-respected community member who works alongside the elders, and a drummer and a singer for 10 years. She is traditional and upholds her treaty rights. So I'll get to that. When arriving, I asked to speak to General Josh Major, and a soldier I spoke with refers me to the public affairs officer. And then when I asked about the chief warrant officer, Jeremy Lehman, who's just underneath General Josh Major, Private Ben Lurch tells me he's not at liberty to say. And the next gate, when asking for the general, the soldier says, I can see if he's in. His name is Ryan, but I couldn't make out the gentleman's last name who I spoke with. And when Josephine asked about the general, the soldier said they're pretty busy and refers us once again to a public affairs officer. And when Josephine asks about the reading material in regard to the Trillium Venture exercise, the soldier has a card that we ask to have, and he says that we can't have it, so we ask to take a picture of it, and he covers up part of it. That's kind of interesting, to say the least. And Josephine asked about if they were inquiring about mental health during wellness checks, and the soldier said he doubts that they would ask anything like that. So then the public affairs officer, Lieutenant Paul Verkey, who I also spoke with on the phone, Josephine asks him if he knows how many soldiers are here. He asks on round or in the exercise. Josephine says here and all together. And Paul says we're planning for over 800. And wellness checks were done May 3rd to 5th. Public Affairs Officer Lieutenant Paul Verkey says he doesn't know what they're asking during the wellness checks. So this is interesting, considering, like, once again, he assumes that the three brigades will be asking things all along the same lines, and then says that they're not asking anything in particular. And so with this being said, like, a soldier mentioned that General Josh Major and that the other commanders and chief warrant officers stepped into another briefing, so they were likely at the base at the time that Josephine and I were there. And it's interesting that we were told that wellness checks were done May 3rd to 5th, considering the fact that I understood that they were only going to be done on the 4th. Let me just pull up that article. The article is right here. Wellness checks or door knocks will be performed in Goderich on Saturday, May 4th to simulate what would happen if soldiers were asked to check on the well-being of residents during an actual emergency. So, anyway, what ends up happening next is during the tour that we took, Josephine asks Paul for brochures, and he states that information can be found online and that the county itself put out information on wellness checks. And a lady, her husband, and child who were taking the tour with us, the lady said that she saw it online, and Paul says they're going and giving them out today and tomorrow, and he says it's monitored and directed by the OPP. And he says that there are OPP, EMS, and fire department and other community leaders in the tent speaking with commanders, having a briefing about the exercise and its capabilities. And these pictures here are interesting because these troops were all right behind us as we were taking the tour, and they didn't appear like they were doing very much. And the young boy that was on the tour with us was he was visibly uncomfortable. So that was kind of interesting to say the least. And like I said, those soldiers were not doing a whole lot, so I don't know exactly what they were doing behind us. This is a picture of General Josh Major, who I've been inquiring about. And then this is Chief Warrant Officer Jeremy Lehman, who is just underneath Josh Major. And then this is right here, you have the commander, which is Lieutenant Colonel Christopher Vandenberg, and Chief Warrant Officer Roger Gonzalez. And they were the ones in charge at the base that was set up at the community center in Blythe, as there was a sign that distinctly showed their names at the community center. So, moving forward, and then this is Lieutenant Paul Verkey as well, if people are curious. So, Josephine and I, on May 4th, we ended up holding a support rally Josephine and I, we held a support rally for the people in Goderich, where in order to support them and as well share our discoveries and findings. So, as well, what I wanted to say too is that this was held at the courthouse square in Goderich. That's a nice overhead image of it. And we were at about the stage, I think, over there. And we also drummed and sang for the people as well. So we as well had held a rally on April the 27th prior to the Trillium Venture Exercise taking place. So Josephine says, the more we unite together and support each other, that we can bring each other some peace and comfort in these unsettling times. And I was describing my channel on YouTube and how people can get a hold of me directly on my Facebook page at Matt Unseated. There's no the in between. And Josephine has been drumming for many years, and we drum together to bring healing for the community, as you can see in this picture. Josephine is speaking on the megaphone and tries to get a police officer to come over and stand with the people and talk about the wellness checks, as we saw a cruiser driving in the square, and he drove away, and he definitely heard her and ignored her. So I explained that the Trillium Venture Exercise is, what the Trillium Venture Exercise is, like the 13-day heat scenario. It was lasting, the exercise lasts from May 3rd to 5th, but they set up a scenario where there was power outages and possible forest fires and stuff like that. So, anyway, when I was talking about this, yeah, we saw a cruiser driving, and Josephine tried to flag him down, and he definitely heard her and ignored her. So I explained what the Trillium Venture Exercise is, and what areas the 3 brigades involved cover, and I spoke with the military on the phone and how there was a decision made with county officials and meetings with them, OPP, EMS, and fire department and military, but the public were not notified, as several Goderich residents and others in the Bruce and Huron County have mentioned. The people voiced their displeasure of not being informed, and I also went over the structure of the Canadian military and explained that Vice Admiral Bob Osterlony is aware of the exercise but not in charge of running it. So the military presence is a normalization for a police state, as I said, and this is what's required to bring in the biodigital convergence agenda. I'll go over that a little bit in the video later, and people can also see various other videos of mine for things like that. And I also explain who Crystal Vander Elst of Policy Horizons is. Once again, I'll also touch on that as well. I also brought up the standardization organizations involved in regulating, normalizing, and bringing forth the technologies and applications for smart infrastructure and such. And I explained why climate change actually relates to what they call twinning, as well as the blockchain. And I also spoke about Kellyanne Wolf for speaking in Parliament and how she is the face for an app called Evolve Blockchain that runs on the blockchain and is basically a direct democracy app. And I explained what NFTs are and the task-based economy and how that relates to CRISPR as well. I mentioned the problem reaction solution scenario and how hyperinflation is there to cause the economy to crash so that they can usher in a new system. I also mentioned how the narrative is controlled on both sides and how the regime and rebellion are one and the same or have common people groups and funding between them. Now Josephine, she explains that we met Paul Verkey at the base before the rally, and before there was a border between Canada and the US, the natives traveled between both. And when you look at today, Goderich is traditional native territory. I'll be going over that a little bit later. She is Onondaga from 6 Nations, and she also explains the Indian problem, which I'll also be going over, and how the government wants the land and the resources, like when they attempt to build a golf course or land development on the corner of a reservation, the native people and the allies uprise. They call it the Indian problem because they just want the land and the resources, and this is everybody's problem now. It's affecting all of us directly. It's not just an Indian problem. Josephine mentions healing ourselves through natural medicines and talks about cedar and white pine. And she also mentions that in 2021, she informed the chief of police in St. Catharines that she was hosting a healing and support drum circle for the community in the midst of a lockdown. She also explains the Two-Row Wampum from 1613, how it's a treaty between the Dutch and Iroquois, an agreement that we are to coexist peacefully, not to interfere in each other's ways, as she brought a flag of the Two-Row Wampum as well. You are able to pick a medicine anywhere, such as cedar or pine needles. You have a right to have a sacred fire. She also explains the Jay Treaty and how you can carry firearms without a permit, and knives for hunting and fishing in any body of water in North America. She emphasizes protecting our water sources and natural springs and mentions findaspring.org, which you can use to find springs in your area and to secure that water source. Water really should be free for everybody, and reservations don't even have clean water. So I'm also going to be going over Find a Spring near the end of the video. Josephine mentions that they were doing wellness checks all 3 days, but they mentioned only doing them on the 4th, like I had just covered in that article. And now I'm flipping back to me. I explained how the Koch family, K-O-C-H, the Koch family are the conservative face in the media, like how Soros is the liberal face. And the Koch family have a monopoly on lumber, oil, and the salt mines that are in town. Compass Minerals. And I explain that Marcus Ray's wife and business partner is Allison Koch. She runs a hairstyling business that supported the administration of the experiment. And the first time I ever heard the Save the Children mantra was through Marcus Ray. So I have to keep this video on YouTube, so I'm going to be using somewhat funny wording when describing DVOC 19 or when talking about the experimental drug. So I mentioned that these dark forces want to create a situation that's unbearable so that there is a revolution, and revolution comes from the word revolve, which is a circular motion, so revolutions don't change anything, and it's basically an easy way to label people as extremists and usher in martial law is what that does, and also all it also may do is replace one tyrant with another tyrant. We do not want to have the Emergencies Act, which is formerly known as the War Measures Act, invoked once again like it was during the truck convoy in Ottawa, and that was enacted from February 14th, 2022 to February 23rd, 2022. And I also explained, and this is explained in other videos of mine, that there's something called the Illuminati card game from the 90s, and there's predictive programming to show the truck convoy. And basically, with the truck convoy funds that were taken from the truckers that were blockchain related, that was essentially an excuse to experiment with Web3 based technologies and plan for public policy in future. And I'm speaking about, investment firms and banks and stuff like that. But ultimately, just because something was coordinated from both sides and the narrative is controlled on both sides, the majority of people that were on the ground during the truck convoy in Ottawa are good people. And the thing though about it as well was that the organizers were very unclear. One person says Tamara Leach, another says Tom Marazzo or Pat King are the organizers, and so on and so forth. So this is the War Measures Act, which is now known as the Emergencies Act. It was a federal law adopted by Parliament on August 22nd, 1914, after the beginning of the First World War. It gave broad powers to the Canadian government to maintain security and order during war, invasion, or insurrection. It was used controversially to suspend the civil liberties of people in Canada who were considered enemy aliens during both world wars. This led to mass arrests and detentions without charges or trials. The War Measures Act was also invoked in Quebec during the 1970 October crisis. The act was repealed and replaced by the more limited Emergencies Act in 1988. So I also explain social engineering from the perspective of think tanks, and they basically create terms and words and phrases and influence how people speak, essentially, our social norms, and then also have an influence on how people get labeled. And then when you consider the outlook from police and military that then become ill-informed and do the bidding of these think tanks, they end up basically participating in things that do not benefit the people, even though, in my understanding, the police and the military are not organizations that were created to benefit the people. But what I'm saying is that there are good people within these organizations, and I don't think they want a biodigitalized future for their family with a social credit score just as much as myself or others watching this video don't want. However, what is noted is that the police and military are not going after policy horizons in Ottawa, which are the face of this biodigital agenda, or those who run different think tanks or the standardization organizations involved in putting the science and technologies of the biodigital convergence into practice. I mentioned that Canada is a corporation and how essentially police and military protect the corporation, and essentially, like I said, good and ignorant people join these organizations and get used to do evil things that they think are good. And all evil really does is mirror, mimic, revert, and pervert. So Canada is a corporation that is registered in Washington, D.C. at the Canadian Embassy through the U.S. Treasuries and Trades Commission. So anyway, I also mentioned that George Soros and the Rockefellers support the Palestinian causes, and organizations like B'nai B'rith support Israel. They also influence people in how they think, skewing definitions between anti-Semitism and Zionism and stuff like that. And if people want that explanation, they can watch the rally video, which will be linked in the description, or they can even see different videos of mine on YouTube that I have put forth, as I have a video based around Israel and Palestine. So I also mentioned that Pierre Poilievre signed the Paris Agreement, and that acts of the tax is a phrase used by him. Yet we also see freedom fighters using that phrase, and I think that cause is really going nowhere, frankly. And I explained the blockchain direct democracy app that Kellyanne Wolf is a part of, and I also speak about Rebel News and its relationship to the Koch family once again, and it's through basically what's called the Libertarian Atlas Network. I'll be going over that later on in the video, so I'll save my breath for now. Josephine attempted to make contact to an OPP officer that was driving in the square, that the people have some questions and would like the OPP officer to speak on behalf of the OPP because the people have questions. The officer clearly heard her as she pleaded with him to come and answer the people's questions. And Josephine mentions that the police officer clearly saw her in the square, and she mentions that you can put up a no trespassing sign or a do not knock sign and the military won't bother you with their wellness checks. And she stated that a mother at the rally that was held on April the 27th prior was unaware of what the military was doing in their door-to-door wellness checks, and she asked why, and Josephine responded, "That's why we're here asking questions, and that's why we called the military, asking questions for the community." Then the lady responded, "Is there going to be a war?" And she was visibly horrified and in fear. People are unsettled that an OPP officer won't even come over just to say, "Hey, I'm here." Anyway, I mentioned that the Canadian website for the 31 Canadian Brigade Group has dated information, and that the commander is Chris Brown and Chief Warrant Officer is Mike Coit, C-O-I-T. And like I said, the website information is dated, so they should probably update that. And then at the end, what happened is 2 residents informed the crowd that there was approximately a dozen troops at Lions Harbor Park on West Street. Approximately 30 minutes ago they saw them. So collectively, we decided that we would go walk down there and ask some questions, since the media said they were mainly there to engage people. And so the people that went, there were 3 women, 2 men, and 1 little dog. Alright, and out of that, one of those women was Josephine, and one of those men was myself. And so there were actually more like approximately 50 soldiers and reserves of 31 Canadian Brigade Group sitting in the gazebo. And our friend Virginia here, she ended up getting to speak with a couple of the troops, but the conversation dissolved when I approached. And we approached to ask some questions, considering we had some phone calls and had unanswered questions. And when attempting to ask some questions, the soldiers laughed at us, ignored us, and had turned their backs on us. These are just some pictures of the gazebo itself. And so this is Dunsford over here. I ended up trying to ask him questions, and of course he turned away and ignored me even when I went right up to him. And we pleaded for anyone to talk to us, and they acted like we didn't exist. And that little dog is Murphy, by the way. So this is one of the soldiers who was laughing when a lady went up to approach and ask questions, and she said that she has a son their age. So I, of course, tried asking for the whereabouts of General Major and if anyone was willing to talk about the exercise. And like, considering the newspaper said that they're there to engage with the public, and Josephine says all the newspaper article says is that if the Canadian military are here to engage with the people, yet you're literally all walking away from us because you're just following orders. Watch Matt Unseated on YouTube as he exposes how the military went for the Native Americans first with the experiment, and she mentions quitting her job. I'll elaborate on that later. And so these are the soldiers walking away, and I ended up asking, I'll get to that guy Jones in a second, I ended up asking if any of them took part in Operation Vector or Operation Laser, which I explained in my previous video. In Laser, the military went to various native reservations and administered the experimental technology, and with Operation Vector, they pretty well did the same thing. And Josephine mentions cures such as cedar and white pine tea. And I also inform them that if they're going into retirement homes, and even if they speak with the management, that the residents who see them are going to be alarmed, considering they're elderly, have heart problems, dementia, and other illnesses. I asked them if they knew where Canadian Joint Operations Command got its orders from, and if they know anything about Joint Task Force Central. I told them that they can see recordings and posts of mine on Facebook at Matt Unseated, such as where I spoke with Paul Verhey. And of course, I was ignored, along with Josephine. And Josephine says, "Did you know that I went to Toronto to support the Toronto police force that didn't want to take the jab? When I could have been home with my children, I walked with the police because they didn't want to take the shot. That's what I do. I'm here for you guys. So enough of the just following orders. If it comes down to it, stand with the people." And I definitely agree with those words, and that was very well spoken, Josephine. So this guy in particular, it took only about 5 minutes of being there before this guy Jones was invading my personal space and pacing back and forth. And when he leaves the gazebo and I follow in the direction he's walking, which is toward the troops, he then told me, "You can stay over there," and indicating for me not to go any closer. And I said, "I can go where I please, thank you. Is this public property?" "Yes, it is. You can't tell me where to go, thank you." And he responds by saying, "You can't harass my guys." And I then say, "Yeah, nobody is harassing your guys. You guys said you'd engage with the public, am I right?" He then tells me we are engaging with the public, and I asked by walking away when you're asked questions. And after half a second of silence, I said, "Exactly, that's what I thought." So I couldn't make out what he said next with his mumbling voice, but I said, "No, I'm just asking questions, and you're seriously not even answering them. You're just trying to make excuses for your men." He turns his back and says, "I have a right to protect my men." And Josephine asks, "What do you mean protect? You have a right to protect your men? I'm a woman in a ribbon skirt with a drum." And I said, "Or protect the Corporation of Canada registered in Washington, D.C. through the U.S. Treasuries and Trades Commission. So we were considered a threat, and it's definitely, this is him pointing us out, it's definitely questionable that we're considered a threat when the Canadian military is supposed to protect us from threats that are foreign and domestic, when apparently, what was it? It was 3 women, 2 men, and 1 little dog named Murphy that they're threatened by. Ridiculous. Anyway, this is him pointing us out to the police, like I said. I'm going to talk about this guy first, Kevin Granger, badge number 11216. And basically, so the Canadian military called the OPP on us, and there's 50 of them and 5 of us, and I don't know what they said to the OPP personally, but when I had originally spoke with this police officer, Kevin Granger, and then I spoke with Officer Kaneko, who was the first officer I scrolled by, badge number 13600. I said to Granger that we just came to ask some questions about the Trillium Venture Exercise, and the military just started to walk away, and they're supposed to engage with the public according to the internet. Granger says, you don't have to yell at them, right? He tried to shut us down without hearing out our side, and I told him that they turned their backs on us, and basically Granger was just talking over me the majority of the time, so the military had obviously lied, right? And we just wanted, Josephine and I just wanted some answers along with the Goderich community. That's all we wanted to do, considering it's 2 phone calls and a visit to the base and still no real answers so far, right? And anyway, Josephine said, she goes, we have a police officer who's willing to talk to you, and pointed me in the direction of Kaneko over here. He tried to tell me that Trillium Venture is just a training exercise, and I started talking about the 3 brigades and how they fall under 4th Division, and he looked like he desperately wanted to get rid of me and was unaware of what I was talking about, and it's definitely kind of alarming that the police don't know or are not on the same level of knowing about this operation as the military are. They should definitely, every piece of information should be transparent, and everybody should be on the same page. Virginia, who we see here, is immune compromised and cannot wear a mask, and Kaneko charged her for not wearing a mask at the Clinton hospital, and Virginia reminds him that she has video evidence of that. So I ended up telling Kaneko that I was looking to speak with General Josh Major, and I asked whose idea Trillium Venture was, and he didn't know. And I asked if he was part of any meetings that involved the county officials, OPP, EMS, Fire, Canadian military, and he said no. So I told him he can find me on Facebook at Matt Unseated and on YouTube at Matt the Unseated. And Josephine said that we're not harassing anybody. We just have questions that we want answered, like I was saying. So she made a point to mention that she doesn't want to end up like China with a social credit system, and Josephine quit her job because she didn't comply with an irrational mandate when there's traditional medicine, and she was in the freezing winter supporting the Toronto police who did not want to take the experiment. On a sidebar, I just want to mention that Josephine is not affiliated with the line. So, with Kevin Granger here, whose badge number is 11216, who I initially spoke with for a few seconds before Josie let me know, before Josie let me know that Kaneko was willing to talk to me, he gave me his badge number, and I shook his hand, and Josephine proceeded to drum and sing, and I sang along with Josephine for a little bit, and she also responded with, "We love you." The song she sang, here's a nice powerful warrior stance of her. The song she sang is called The Longest Walk, so I'm going to read a little bit about it here. The song was given by Tom Paul. It is sung in honor of those who took part in the civil rights movement in the 1960s, which included Aboriginals as well as blacks. The tempo starts very slowly and accelerates with each successive repetition. The intent is to emulate a small band of marchers pacing uncertainly along the street in justifiable fear. They know that they are in the right to demand their rights, but they are very conscious of the many silent watchers on all sides who do not support their stance. But then gradually, other people leave the hostile crowd and join their ranks. With this encouragement, their steps grow firmer and their voices grow louder. Each repetition is a bit faster as their numbers and their confidence increase together. The fourth repetition should be brisk, indicative of a proud stride with heads held high and hearts united in obtaining justice. This can be sung in a circle, with one person leading the first line and then the rest of the singers joining in on the second line. If desired, the lead can shift to other singers around the circle for each new repetition. Honor beats fall on the underlined syllables because this song was written in the southern United States. There are only 3 honor beats instead of 4. Sometimes the first repetition is a slow beat with no honor beats to add to the solemnity. And so this is how it's sang and repeated 4 times. I recommend watching the video once again to hear Josephine singing just for that alone. And moving forward, this here is Columba. I ended up pointing out this is a stream right after Lions Harbor Park, just leaving. I pointed out a blue Ford truck with the license plate number 26671, and I also saw troops around that same blue Ford truck in the previous video. So, and I saw them getting something from the trunk. I'm not sure what exactly. So there's a truck in particular, with someone driving who had a gray beard, and Josephine says, "Hi, I know you can hear me. Thought you were going to engage with the people." And one of the army guys with the gray beard, like I said, in the truck rolled his window up. And I then said to let Josh Major know that I have some questions. And I went to get the license plate numbers of a different blue Ford truck with the license plate number 26670 and a green truck with the license plate 90153. And Columba is who I spoke with upon exiting Lions Harbor Park and speaking with the OPP, who is resistant to answer questions. I asked for his name and rank, to which he pointed at his name and rank and just said name, rank. And I asked him to tell me what the rank is, being that I don't know the military rank symbols, and he said, try Googling it. I then asked why he doesn't answer questions, and unnecessarily and aggressively, a police vehicle pulled up in front of Josephine quite fast. And so Columba then asks, what did they tell you when you got here? And I asked, what does that matter? And for him to answer my question. And Josephine said, you're supposed to engage with the community. And Columba responds by saying, that's what we're doing. And Josephine and I said that everybody's leaving. And Columba said, everybody's being hostile toward us. Josephine says, hostile? We're asking you a question. What's hostile? And according to him, having the camera pointed at him is hostile. I took a step back, even though he had more than enough room, and then he said he would be willing to answer questions at that point. So Josephine asked what some of the wellness check questions. Josephine asked what some of the wellness check questions that are going to be asked and why you're going into old age homes. And Columba says they're in a simulated scenario right now, And Josephine mentions the 13-day heat wave. Columba says that's correct. In the scenario, there's a downed electrical grid, so we're going door to door to make sure people have flashlights, enough water, enough food because electrical systems went down. This is all scenario based, right? Those are the types of questions we're asking going door to door. So there it goes about there's something in question about whether they're asking questions or not once again, so apparently they are. He also mentions long-term care facilities as those are people at risk. And Josephine asks about talking to the management away from the patrons so people with dementia and heart problems are not scared. And he says that that's something that he can raise. And I asked if he participated in Operation Laser and Operation Vector, which he did not. And the pamphlets, which I'll get to showing, don't mention anything about food and water, for one thing. And also starting off very defensive the way he did is not the way to go. And he he mentions asking questions, like I said, and Pulver, he didn't give a straight answer in regards to that either. So now just going to bring up one of the articles here. It says that the exercise will involve approximately 800 Army reservists, and then also mentions that the community is encouraged to interact with reservists. Well, people saw exactly what our interaction was like. So then also what I want to say is that this Goderich article that mentions the OPP is pretty well straight, for lack of better words, fear porn, because it says extreme caution around military, yet other articles are telling you that they're approachable and to approach them, so it makes no sense. And also with this article here in particular, it ends up mentioning 800, or sorry, this one ends up mentioning that it consists of 2,100 soldiers. So this is definitely, you know, things are definitely not clear, especially about the numbers that are mentioned. And also, people are encouraged to approach the military, yet to approach with caution. So there's a contradiction right there. And then, as well, it mentions that the goal of the exercise is to get as many area communities as possible. So, and this one is also inconsistent with the number 800. So, and mentions extra caution. So, all these mixed messages and deception causes confusion and tumult, let alone the experiences that Josephine and I endured. So, anyway, gonna move forward and continue talking about the experience. So, we ended up going back to the Goderich Courthouse Square after the area of Lions Harbor Park and speaking to Columba. And so people that were there were Derek Noonan, Lynn Brooks, and others who arrived at the Courthouse Square. And Noonan didn't even want to get out of his car, it seemed, and people were very disinterested to hear what I had to say, and they even turned their backs on us, very much like the Canadian military did. Sorry, they turned their backs on me, excuse me. So I would encourage you as well to watch this video. And in the latter part of the live, Josephine made a statement that she's not affiliated with Derek Noonan, Lynn Brooks, the Facebook group Canadian Woman for Freedom, and Mr. Freedom. And she states that when she exposed the #1 influencer and YouTube of the Trucker Convoy, Dave Live from the Shed from Trucker Convoy 2022, that information is on her timeline, Noonan and Mr. Freedom attempted an online slander campaign against her, and attached are the Mr. Freedom live videos that are false accusations, and Noonan had made a post on Ontario Patriots for Freedom that are false accusations. message Josephine directly for the post. I will also include those links in the description. So I've also mentioned Derek Noonan as he spoke in Parliament at the same time that Kellyanne Wolf did. The same day at a different time. And Kellyanne Wolf was promoting the stupid blockchain app, and Noonan was talking about things like independent and electable Senate and revisions of the Privy Council and the Crown, and asks if we want to have a parliamentary based democracy, which is just kind of playing into Kellyanne Wolf's stupid blockchain app that I've discussed in various videos. And so any of the videos where I talk about that or the parliament shenanigans, for lack of better words, will be in the description as well. So moving forward, Rebel News here ended up doing a report on the Trillium Venture Exercise. So the camera woman is Avery Armstrong, and basically the only things really to take from this are the fact that Rebel News were in Hensel, Ontario, and in Hensel they were distributing tips on an emergency survival kit and if there will be problems with wildfires. And these are the flyer. This is the flyer that was distributed, and this is the French side of it. So, and of course there's no, and of course, yeah, this is the flyer right here. So here it mentions Menzies ends up asking a soldier what they would say to alleviate concerns and so on and so forth. I'm not really going to go over the whole interview in particular, but in a nutshell, the narrative is presented that the soldiers were friendly, and also the fact that gun grabs and experimental technology checks. Sorry, I have to use very weird wording in order to keep this on YouTube. But he ends up mentioning that at least 5 times, if not more. And he also mentions that why don't they just have these brochures mailed out? And I kind of do agree with that statement, but he says, who can blame the soldiers? They're just following orders, which is a load of BS, bunk, and an excuse for the soldiers. And he says he blames the entity responsible for eroding our civil liberties in recent years is quote-unquote big government. But the reality is that there are various think tanks and standardization organizations and such like that also behind it. So that's a very generalized phrase right there, and one that promotes anger toward a small fraction of individuals that are responsible for tyranny. And so there are entities that are behind the Canadian government, such as the monarchy, and that's in the form of the Governor General, which is the federal representative for the monarchy in this country, and then the lieutenant governors, which are the provincial representatives for the monarchy. And then you also have Policy Horizons, which was created by the Privy Council, and like I said, they're the face of the biodigital convergence. So this right here, this Canuck Law article that I've used in several videos, mentions different Atlas Network partners. And Atlas Network is a think tank that is largely funded by the Koch family. And you see Fraser Institute, which Ezra Levant attended. Ezra Levant is the head of Rebel News. You also have the JCCF, which are lawyers that push the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in the freedom movement. And then you have Preston Manning from the Manning Center, who's good friends with Stephen Harper, and then the Montreal Economic Institute, where Maxime Bernier worked. So now moving forward, this right here is when we ended up stopping, Josephine and I ended up stopping at a Knights of Columbus Hall where we spoke to Master Corporal Favat, who was stationed there at this Knights of Columbus Hall in Goderich, and he claimed that the wellness checks were done last year in Chatham, Kent, and that there was a simulated ice storm. I didn't hear about that. And I asked if the Canadian Joint Operations Command is where orders trickle down from, and he said it was quote-unquote div level, referring to 4th Division, and he wasn't sure of Chief Warrant Officer Jeremy Lehman or General Josh Major's whereabouts. And Josephine asked if this was a Masonic lodge, and he said no. He said he believes it's a Knights of Columbus Hall. So, and these are some of the trucks and stuff that were there. And there were also some OPP vehicles that were there. We ended up going to the base in Blythe for the second time, which was at 8:17 p.m. And we went back to the base to ask questions about the exercise and to support the community. And Josephine approached the soldiers with her eagle feather to speak her truth. And she said, "I'm not hostile," and explains that we were told we were hostile and to leave when we went to ask questions to the soldiers in Lions Harbor Park. And she mentions that nobody was asked about this exercise and that the soldiers would engage with the public, yet the soldiers walked away. And around this time, Lynn Brooks was in the area and shouted, "Do not comply." And Josephine stated that we are not part of that group because we are not affiliated with them. And she is referring to Derek Noonan and Lynn Brooks. And that was also quite nonsensical what Lynn Brooks did. So, once again, I asked to speak to General Josh Major and stated that I was on, and stated this is me speaking to the Public Affairs Officer, Paul Verhey. I stated that I was on the phone with him and that I spoke to Major Pierre Baudry and the assistant who is the assistant to the general, and I asked who created the simulation, as Baudry tried to pass the buck approximately 7 times when I was on the phone with him. And Verhey states that they're going door to door tomorrow, meaning May the 5th, but not in Goderich. And he does not say where until I ask him, and he says Kincardine. So the military obviously volunteers as little information as possible, which makes things very confusing and hard to follow, and also shows a lack of transparency on their part. Wellness checks or door knocks are to be performed on May 4th in Goderich, like I had shown in that article that I had pulled up earlier. And I didn't know that there would be wellness checks done on other dates. I asked if General Major is at the base and asked Verhey to go to communications, and reluctantly Verhey states that the general doesn't have a radio. And 3 OPP cruisers drove by at the time that Verhey states that the best way to contact the general is through calling the Denison Armory, where his office is, because they would have his numbers. And Paul says, I don't have his numbers, and I tell him that I called 4th Division directly, and they ended up patching me through to the executive assistant, which is Major Pierre Baudry. Did not get the chance to speak to Josh Major, and also I wonder why Josh Major does not have a radio as well, or why people don't have his personal cell number, I guess, either. So Paul says I can ask any of the soldiers here what they're doing on the exercise, and says we had an opportunity earlier to speak with soldiers. making excuses is what he's doing. And he said that with 31 Canadian Brigade group, a soldier will come one night a week, where they come in and do supplementary training, and they come together for a weekend exercise like this. Not every week, but when the time comes, this training is for domestic response to provide aid in case of specifically this exercise for floods and for search and rescue. So I asked to speak to Chief Warrant Officer Jeremy Lehman, and Paul says he's traveling with the general. And when I asked to speak to the commander, Lieutenant Colonel Chris Vandenberg, Paul says, quote, he's touring around, whatever that means. Josephine asks if we can talk to the general tomorrow morning, and Verkey asks if I can provide an email, which I do. And one of our friends, Virginia, was visually shaken because of the poor treatment by the Canadian military and the OPP. Paul states that he had a hard time with the tornado that hit Goderich in 2013, and Josephine states that the military wasn't there at that time. So I end up asking what role CJOC is playing in this exercise, and Paul says none. He says they're mandating certain types of training that's part of Operation Lentis, which has to do with domestic response, that takes all the domestic response that Canada does and umbrellas it. I ask if it's ongoing, and Paul confirms it is, and that you can look online to see every year what they participated in and what they did. He says there's no bearing with CJOC as to what goes on in this exercise. 4th Division mandates the training that they need to uphold. So I'm still confused as to whether Trillium Venture is actually part of Operation Lentis or not, or Trillium Venture Exercise is to train for an Operation Lentis. Like, that is still unclear, and also if Canadian Joint Operations Command is involved and what their role is still also a little bit confusing for myself. So, moving forward, different line of questioning. I asked Paul if he had ever heard of Policy Horizons in Ottawa, and Paul says he hasn't, and I informed him that they were created by the Privy Council of Canada. And I asked if he's ever heard the term biodigital convergence. He says he has. And I asked him to define it in his best words, and he says, I would prefer you to define it so that we can go from the same, and kind of implies being on the same page, I guess, but he just wants me to do more of the talking. So I explained that it's the amalgamation of biological life with the digital and blurring those lines, and I ask if he agrees with the definition. He agrees. So then I then ask if this is something he's for or against, and Paul says he can't comment because he hasn't done the research. And I ask if he wants a world for his family and children with a social credit system akin to China, where you have a DNA strand on the blockchain using CRISPR technology, where you're competing for tasks, and whoever gets and accomplishes those tasks gets allotted tokens where you can use them for water, food, and shelter, and if you don't get a task, you don't get tokens and you can't buy anything. I ask if he knows anything about China, and he states he knows it's a country. Josephine mentions the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, and a social credit system, and says you can't speak up about anything or you're denied everything. Paul says he believes in the freedom of speech and the Canadian values upheld in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Well, that's interesting because in Section 1 of the Charter, all of the rights granted, which are really just privileges in the Charter, can be trampled over under what they call reasonable grounds. So I'm going to refer to an article here in particular about military spending, and also for Paul Verkey to educate himself a little bit about China, at least from the perspective of this article, and then I'll implement my 2 cents. Canada's military will take a bigger role in the North over the next 2 decades as climate change and increasingly aggressive foes threaten Arctic sovereignty, says a new defense policy document released Monday. And this article is from April 8th. And Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was flanked by Defense Minister Bill Blair, Veterans Affairs Minister Jeanette, and I can't pronounce her last name, and the Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, as he announced the policy at Canadian Forces Base Trenton. Trudeau says technological advances in cyber attacks mean there are myriad ways for engagement that go beyond traditional borders. Rising and disruptive powers like China and Russia mean NATO's northern and western flank is the Canadian Arctic. So China is described as rising and disruptive powers. You think that the Canadian military would at least have the idea that China is a threat, at least from their textbook knowledge. And the reason why I say this is because through means of fifth generation warfare, basically, which is using immigration as a weapon, what happens is one country, like China for instance, will have the immigrants that go into a country such as Canada get different jobs and employment and education that brings them into different fields that allow them to, say, have influence over public policy or banking policies and being involved in finance and even perhaps the military itself. So that's pretty well how fifth generation warfare works. And along with that, I'm just going to read a little bit more. Along with that, Trudeau said Canada is exploring the possibility of joining the second phase of AUKUS, which is the US-led alliance of the UK and Australia. And the initial pillar of the alliance was focused on developing nuclear-powered submarines for Australia. And its second phase is focused on advanced capabilities like quantum computing, AI, and cyber technologies. So the Canadian Armed Forces is setting up a cyber command, which we will see the military work with the communications security establishment. And the article is interesting, as I mentioned, fifth generation warfare, and also the fact that the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, is actually largely funded by the government of Canada and a Chinese Communist Party pharma company called CanSino Biologics. So, moving forward to continue what happened here, we wanted to explain to the base and speak to a higher up about how we were disrespected, and we also have unanswered questions. We voiced our concerns about how we were treated, and it was absolutely ridiculous how the military called the police, or rather had to hide behind the police. A couple of OPP were on the road that were recorded, and at this time, Josephine ends up explaining the treaty one dish, one spoon, which I'll give an explanation of near the end of the video. And she was frustrated and mentioned that this was Haudenosaunee territory, but that was a mistake. And there has not been a whole lot of truth in this whole ordeal. So, Josephine acknowledging her error. The town of Goderich has the privilege of being within the traditional territory of the Attawandaron and Ojibwe peoples. The land is covered by Treaty 29 of 1827 and in the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Agreement, which once again I will go over a little bit later in the video. And Josephine also mentions the Two-Row Wampum and the Jay Treaty, where you can hunt and fish anywhere and carry a knife or firearm and pick medicine. I should say anywhere in North America. And basically, I ended up saying that if the Canadian military is supposed to protect us from threats that are both foreign and domestic, then Paul should really take a look into policy horizons and the biodigital convergence, because the fate of mankind really depends on it, and every country is involved in that agenda, from China to Israel and the Israel Innovation Center, or Japan through its cyber avatar capitalism, as some examples here. So, moving forward, I'm going to talk about the Indian problem, as Josie had brought that up to Lieutenant Paul Verkey. So, the Indian problem comes from this guy here. His name is Duncan Campbell Scott. He was born August 2nd, 1862 in Ottawa and died December 19th, 1947. And he is considered a poet, supposedly. But anyway, however, his literary work has arguably been overshadowed. I would say definitely been overshadowed by his role as the Deputy Superintendent of the Department of Indian Affairs. And he enforced and expanded residential schools, failed to respond to a tuberculosis epidemic, and oversaw a treaty process that many claimed robbed Indigenous people of land and rights. His oft-quoted goal to get rid of the Indian problem became for many characteristic of the federal government's treatment of Indigenous peoples. I don't personally use the word Indigenous because that word is within UNDRIP, the United Nations Declarations for Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and it does not define that word and allots different land and resource rights to the quote-unquote indigenous. So I just don't use that word, and people can watch other videos of mine where I address UNDRIP and those involved in it. So Josephine ends up saying, as she is holding her eagle feather, she says, "We are not hostile, and I'm not a threat." Josephine tells Paul, she told the troops earlier, if we have to stand together, stand with the people. And Paul makes excuses for his troops by saying they may not have understood that we were talking to them, but it was definitely quite clear, as Josephine did have a megaphone, and she stood at a distance, and I went to approach and ask questions as they turned their backs, and they had also ignored the dog owner. The dog is Murphy, by the way, once again, and if 3 women, 2 men, and a dog are considered a threat, then I don't know what to say about the Canadian military. But anyway, Josephine said, we know they're following orders not to talk to us, but they shouldn't put it in the newspaper that they're going to engage with us and not engage and call us hostile and try and intimidate us. Absolutely. So, and then within 4 minutes of leaving, here's a picture of Paul Verkey and I, by the way. Within 4 minutes of leaving, Josephine pulls over to use the GPS, and an OPP cruiser pulled up behind her without lights on, and there was one in front at quite a distance ahead. And Josephine was not in any distress and signaled to go back on the road to continue her route. Then the officer that was behind her pulled out and put his lights on, so then she pulled over. And then the officer that was in front of us did a U-turn to get behind the OPP that was behind us. So 2 officers came up, one on the passenger side and one on the driver's side. And when they took Josephine's license and registration, it took 10 minutes. And the experience was traumatizing for both of us. And the amount of time we waited was an inconvenience and an intimidation tactic. And this is the person on the driver's side. Josephine was given a fine for something the ministry should have told her about, because She inquired about it when she renewed her license and paid her fines. So the officer said that automatic license plate readers are what notify the OPP officer that the permit is not validated. Sounds like geofencing to me. And the name of the badge number of the police officer beside me was Auxiliary Constable Jesse Broadwell, Alpha 4441, and Constable Billy, which is spelled like Billy with an EA at the end, badge number 15778 or 15778A. I'm not quite sure, but people can listen to the recording for that information. And when Josephine and I tell the OPP officer on her side that the soldiers were supposed to engage with the public, his response is that what they're supposed to do? I don't know. Like, shouldn't he know what's going on? Anyway, moving forward, past the intimidation tactic. Moving forward to May the 8th, I had a phone call. I tried calling 4th Division to reach General Josh Major, and once again had a phone call with Major Pierre Beaudry, who is the executive assistant to the general. So it took some time for me to even get a hold of anyone to speak to, which I ended up speaking to Beaudry, but before that, so I called 32nd Canadian Brigade Group and asked to speak with Colonel Best, who's in charge, according to their website, assuming it's not dated. And they patched me through to extension number 2800, go to a voicemail, and where I get an extension, number 319634 2800. So, calling back, the receptionist said they don't have a Colonel Best, so I asked to speak with the base commander, whose extension is 3735, and doesn't have a name for that extension, and there was endless ringing. So, calling once again, I asked for Chief Warrant Officer Frank Atio, and I'm probably mispronouncing that, that's Atyeo. He apparently wrote his number wrong, and he's with Queen's Own Rifles at the Dalton Armory. So, Colonel Alan Best wrote a number that doesn't make sense, which is why it's not in the database, apparently. So I get patched through to the executive assistant at extension 2939, whose name is Buljabasic, and a voicemail comes up that says, we reached extension number 319-634-2939. So next I end up calling 33 Canadian Brigade Group and asked to speak with the base commander, Colonel McKay. I was informed that he's the brigade commander, not the base commander, and Captain Sean Earwaker says he won't patch me through to a colonel with the info that he has, and I let him know that I have questions about the Trillium Venture Exercise, and he asks who I'm affiliated with and who I represent, and I tell him that I'm independent media, and he says he'll direct me to a public affairs officer. When I asked Sean about if wellness checks were done in the area, he says he can't provide that info with who you are. And he asks, and asking over these means. And he says this is a duty line, and he can't provide information to someone who can't confirm their identity. He says he'll direct me to the public affairs officer, whose name is Lieutenant Andy McLaughlin, who is happy to answer questions. I mentioned that this is interesting because I thought this would be public information, and he states the public information officer, quote, is uniquely skilled in dealing with it. He gives me the email address of Lieutenant Andy McLaughlin, which is andrew.mclaughlin@forces.gc.ca, and I ask for an extension. He gives me a phone number, 519-854-8697. He says I could call him back at the phone number I called or email him at sean.earwaker@forces.gc.ca. And business hours are Monday to Friday, 7 to 3 or 8 to 4, he says. So I end up calling 4th Division. Let me get a drink of water and then I'll continue. I end up calling 4th Division, and what happens is it's interesting because Paul definitely Pierre Baudry definitely recognized who I was, and he ends up telling me that I asked if sorry, let me just start over a second. I called 4th Division and I got a hold of Pierre Baudry, and he says, Matt, from the other day, and he says he's happy to talk to me, or he can send a public affairs officer. And he says he asks if I'm a media person, and that he could get me in touch with a public affairs officer for an interview. And I mentioned Operation Lentis being ongoing, and Baudry says not exactly, and this is interesting because Paul told me that Operation Lentis is ongoing. So I asked who ordered the Trillium Venture Exercise, and Baudry finally admitted to 4th Division creating the exercise. And Baudry explains how an Operation Lentis happens. It starts with a request for assistance from a civilian government through, in the case of us, it's usually the province of Ontario, and for them to get to the point where they're at the point of sending out a request for assistance, they have to have a strict, their integral capability to respond, and it has to be for something where we would be the only people that are able to help out. Generally, the ways where we are unique in our ability to respond is our ability to put a lot of people in remote places quickly. Outside of that, we don't have a lot of specific skills. We have engineers. We have the Navy that has small boats and those types of things. So we help out in many different ways, but the government of Ontario needs to go to the private sector first and confirm that there is no one else that can do this, because we can't take business away from people that have a legitimate business to sponsored emergencies as well. So that's the process of how a Lentis type task would come to us, and that's what we're looking at putting into practice on exercises like Trillium Venture. Right, so I asked if 4th Division ordered Trillium Venture. Previously focused on tabletop exercises, process, and planning to see how they'd respond to a domestic operation. They do them often enough that it's worthwhile to go through the execution, because that's where flaws are seen, he says. So I clarify with Baudry that the deployment falls under Joint Task Force Central and brigades under 4th Division, and troops are taken under territorial battle groups, which are specific groups for certain exercises or operations. He says it's very, very transparent. It's the same commander, and he means commander of 4th Division, which is General Josh Major, and he says it means nothing to you from the receiving end. Well, for us to know the process, actually, yeah, it is quite essential, and I understand that some of these things can be very easily looked up on the internet, but you got to know where to go, and you got to know the right terminology and what to type in order to actually look and find out these things, like what a territorial battle group is, for instance. So I remind Baudry of when I asked about the UN last time, and how he brought up how they serve in international operations, and I asked if he's familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, and he asks the governments, and I asked the UN Sustainable Development Goals, are you familiar with this terminology? He says not really, and I explained that they're the 17 mandates of the UN, and that all governments that are aligned with the UN follow the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And he says somewhat nervously, unfortunately, I'm a maintenance officer, not a policy officer. This is far from what I'm comfortable speaking to. So dodging a bullet is what he does, I guess. And for me to explain here is that all governments that are aligned with the United Nations follow those 17 Sustainable Development Goals as per their mandates, such as things having to do with climate change. So I asked about the wellness checks and if specific questions were asked, and he says there was a confusion because of the terminology. He says our definition of a wellness check in the case of an opulentus, we would send troops to people's homes to be like, hey, understand this area is flooded or under severe flood warning. Do you have water? Do you have power? Do you need assistance to get out of here? He says the wellness checks they're doing isn't in regards to mental health, as that is the connotation for a wellness check in regards to police. Do I know exactly what our troops were saying to people when they were knocking on their doors? No, I don't have that level of definition again. If you want me to chase that down, I can. I asked who would have that info, and he said it would be the majority of people doing wellness checks. And he suggested I call 31 Canadian Brigade Public Affairs Officer for better information. He asked for my name and number, but I gave him my email. So once again, it appears like they were asking questions when we were told they were not. So once again, that whole area is definitely confusing. And if they were asking questions, what were they really asking? I next inquired about retirement homes, and he said to think about a situation where there is flooding or no power. He mentions they have backup generators, so he mentions how much time would it take to get there and get a transport plan in place. What does the transport plan look like, and what do they need to have a transport to have to transport people that are medically at risk? When you're doing it for real for the first time, there's a lot of potential for failures. We want to get our leaders through the process of asking those questions and having those conversations ahead of time so that when it does happen, they already have an idea in the back of their mind what this is going to look like, what they need to get prepared, and then they go to wherever that place is and talk to the actual people, and they can narrow, and then they can narrow to what this specific location gets or needs. It's really all about planning. So why does he say when it happens instead of if it happens is the question. So, and that's definitely a little bit unnerving for sure. I asked Beaudry about approaches from the military in Oshawa where questions were asked, such as if people own their own home, how many people live there, how many bedrooms, and Beaudry mentions they didn't have anyone working in or around Oshawa in the Trillium Venture Exercise. So I asked if any brigade asked if people have a garden and provisions, if they own their home, how many bedrooms, firearms, and he said no. And I asked how many wellness checks were done in total. He said he could probably get an approximate answer. And I asked if all three brigades were asking the same questions, and he said that would have been coordinated with local authorities. One municipality suggested handing out emergency preparedness pamphlets. Beaudry says when we're doing these things, we try to organize with the local and municipal councils and say we're doing this. Is there any value from our end? I asked him to email me those pamphlets. Asked me what pamphlets would look like. I asked him to email me what pamphlets would look like in different municipalities. I still have not received that email. I told him that 31 Canadian Brigade Group was unapproachable, and Beaudry tells me he's seen my videos. He also says that not every Army guy is a media person, and says that the public affairs officer is trained to interact with the people. He says everyone is kind of doing their best. We're in a situation where we know you're calling around, we know you're filming people, right? And that makes people feel uncomfortable to start. Remember, anything we say is what the government of Canada is saying, so our troops are inherently uncomfortable taking that space. It's hard for a 19-year-old to say, I'm going to say the right things to the government of Canada. You gotta remember those things. I mentioned the news, and I refer to the Godrich paper that essentially the public to approach the military with caution, which is essentially, fear porn. and I said they should be approachable, and the public affairs officer passed the buck as I had asked to speak to General Josh Major. I mentioned to him that Verhey told me that Josh doesn't have a radio, and if the general doesn't have a radio, then I'm worried for the safety of the Canadian troops. Beaudry says that the people carry cell phones, but nobody on the ground could radio Josh, and that there's multiple levels of people in between. So this is definitely somewhat alarming because the Canadian military should be trained in how to deal with situations and even diffuse problems. Not that myself or Josephine were a problem or anybody that was there. We just wanted questions answered and they ignored us. And I'm under the impression that we're allowed to, or sorry, I'm under the impression to approach and that they're supposed to be approachable, and the news even said that they encourage the public to ask questions and approach. And I understand that there are also mixed messages of fear in the media as well. However, that's not the way things should go. You should not be afraid to ask any public official what is going on and expect a clear answer, or at the very least be able to direct you to somebody who knows. And also, with regards to the megaphone, all it really takes is for somebody to say, hey, we'll happily talk to you, just please put down the megaphone, and really that simple. So we're just concerned about the community, and we have questions about the exercise and what's really going on here, and if there is anything bigger beyond the exercise. So anyway, Beaudry says for me to put myself in their shoes. If someone was asking questions they didn't have answers to, he says a 19-year-old probably never met the general. He also says some of them are not even really sure what they're doing on that exercise. They see only a small portion of it. I let him know that they laughed and turned their backs, which is unprofessional and disrespectful, and he says we can raise that to our commanders, and that's going to make a difference. I said that they can at least try to get a hold of somebody, and we were described as a threat. And by we, I mean myself, Native woman in regalia with her drum, and also other older people that were present, and small dog. Beaudry says, I don't think anyone wants that kind of relationship, but you also on your hand have to engage in that kind of relationship, understanding that you are coming up to them and filming them, and that can be a very stressful situation because they're representing the government of Canada. They don't get to say, I'm just a guy. He also says that's why a lot of people say no comment, and this is outside to what I'm comfortable saying. I remind Beaudry that they turned their backs and laughed, and that they didn't even say that. And I remind him that the media said they'll engage, and that it's not hard to say I don't know. Which it really wasn't that hard to deal with that and to address us and speak to us like human beings. Beaudry goes on to say that it's not as easy as I make it sound, and that he knows he's being recorded, and that it's stressful, and he doesn't know if he's going to say anything wrong. I asked why he's stressed and told him he's doing his best. I remind him that Verhey spoke in circles, and Beaudry said he would be happy to organize an interview if I come up with my questions up front, and then I would be able to speak to the right person who has the right answers, which is the best way, and that this is the best way to do this if it were broadcasted. So basically, you give the questions beforehand so that these people can rehearse how to answer something, or even possibly just decline an interview altogether, and possibly not even speak to the general from the sounds of it. So I mentioned that the public is unsettled by the military presence, and I was consistently past the buck, and I was disrespected as well. And Beaudry says I have to stay in my lane, and that being recorded, he has to watch every sentence, and it's stressful. I brought up how the meetings in regards to Trillium Venture Exercise that public officials, OPP, fire, and EMS and military were closed to the public, and the people have questions, want transparency, and people were also unaware that the military was there, and especially even traveling afterward to Godrich after the exercise. People were unaware that the military was even there. He then mentions a media plan that consists of how early is information pushed out, what level of details, what do people need to know. At the same time, we do need to film every planning meeting that we have. I think at some point it gets a bit like unnecessary, he says. No, even though these meetings are very dry, it's not unnecessary to record every single thing that happens because the public do deserve full transparency. And even if somebody has the attention span of a goldfish, there are people like myself that will watch everything. And these people in places such as the military or the police need to be held accountable for their actions as well. So they need to be fully transparent. So if only certain aspects of a closed door meeting are recorded, then it's also not full transparency. So what are the motives truly behind the Trillium Venture Exercise? He then says a public affairs officer can take questions down and they'll get back to me. And I explained that it's best to speak to the top of command in regards to this exercise because then I would obtain a more clear and transparent answer than speaking to a public affairs officer. He again states that the best way to do this is a request for media interview, and I then state that I have more questions, and Beaudry tells me he has 5 minutes. So I ask if he's heard of Policy Horizons. He got very quiet and said something that I couldn't hear. So I repeated myself, and he says, sorry, I told him I couldn't hear him. He says, sorry, I'm not tracking that. Do you have context? And I mention it's in Ottawa and ask if he's heard of the organization Policy Horizons. He says, oh, it's an organization. I confirm that it's an organization created by the Privy Council of Canada and ask if it rings a bell. He says it doesn't. So I ask if he's familiar with the biodigital convergence and if he's heard that term before. He says he's never heard it, and I tell him that it's the amalgamation of what is digital and biological and blurring those lines, which is what Policy Horizons works towards. He asks if biodigital convergence is an idea and if Policy Horizons is an organization. And I confirm yes, but I also mention that the biodigital convergence is an agenda and that you can go on the Policy Horizons website and download your documents. He asks if it's a part of the Department of National Defense, and I said, no, I don't think that's part of it. But I will just say that since this phone call, I have learned more about the Department of National Defense and their relationship to the biodigitalization agenda, which I'll be covering further into this video. So I explained the task-based economy to him and mentioned that the blockchain is used in conjunction with CRISPR for DNA-based NFTs, and want to create a world where we're competing for tasks that are limited in number, and once tasks are completed, we get tokens loaded onto DNA blockchain nodes. And Beaudry asks how this relates to the Trillium Venture Exercise, and I explained that information is severely compartmentalized, so the military presence would be a normalization for dealing with a police state, and I make it clear that this may not be the intention of all the troops in the exercise, but that evil needs good and or ignorant people for it to thrive, and Beaudry says that a police state isn't his intention. And I mentioned that if the military is supposed to protect us from threats, both foreign and domestic, then people should be looking at the Policy Horizon and questioning their officials involved in this agenda, which is pretty much every federal politician. And Beaudry says for anything like this that he'll have to refer me to my member of parliament. And I state that I would like to educate everybody so that they're familiar with this agenda and so that no family of men, women, and children have to live in a system like this. I say that the military presence is a normalization of a police state, and Beaudry says, I'm sorry that's how you felt, and for anyone else that felt this way. I mentioned that when the military turn their backs, it's not only a sign of disrespect, but also distrust. And Baudry says, I hope that our conversation today has helped to right that wrong, and that you feel that we are out there trying to engage with people as best as I can. And I tell him that the people are unsettled. So, gonna read a little bit about this military magazine right here. Going to page 33 is where I'm going to start. So on page 33, actually I think it's page 26, excuse me, it ends up mentioning Quest. Yeah, so it's actually page 31, excuse me. It says Quest develops and, sorry, it's right on the website here. Quest develops and commercializes proprietary next-generation tactical systems that advance operational effectiveness and survivability for military and public safety personnel developed at the tactical edge. Those commanders, soldiers, operators, and first responders conducting operations primarily in the dismounted domain on foot and on and off vehicles. Quest capabilities and market offerings are grouped into three main lines of business: digitization, counter-threat, and non-lethal. So this is TDFS. So this essentially is the high-intensity mobile peer-to-peer fight, and the execution of rapid maneuver and battle command require the ability to maneuver arms at battle group and below to engage threats rapidly with the organic means at their disposal. And so I'm just going to read a little bit here. So I'll start from page 26. It mentions here we are really recognizing that to do the transformation we want to do from an army perspective, the first step is to move into the 21st century from a digital perspective, Demers said, to maintain integration and interoperability. And with allies, the common language will be the digital network. Without that, you are not a modern fighting force. The strategy is an acknowledgement that the Army must change its entire relationship with technology at every level and in every function. And that won't happen unless the force is willing to experiment, to encourage participative force development, and to trial emerging technology down to its lowest echelons. We want to make sure that every soldier that comes up with a good idea can test it, and that there is a way to feed it back through the system that will then influence our conceive and design process and drive doctrine that will then drive more experimentation that will drive equipment procurement, Demers explained. We need to be better at capturing that. And the strategy has 5 aim points to help guide Army units and members on a transformation path, explained Colonel Dan McKinney, Director, Land Command and Information, and the document's lead author. The first is a cultural pivot intended to accelerate digital innovation. The second is digital leadership, spearheaded by a leadership hub with Army headquarters. Third is participative force development, encouraging experimentation from the lowest levels up. Fourth is integration of technology in day-to-day business processes. And fifth is interoperability, specifically through experimentation with allies at events like the U.S. Army's Project Convergence and the multinational Bold Quest. Yeah, Project Convergence is interesting because there's like sort of like meta headsets or something for the U.S. Army, but I'm focusing on the Canadian military. The document acknowledges that many of those aim points are also among the potential barriers to successful change. especially the suboptimal digital culture, digital literacy, leadership expertise, procurement practices better suited to large platform projects, and maintaining interoperability as partners like the U.S. Army advance more rapidly. We try to capture all the challenges we would face. So, going to move forward here. The app to collect and assess soldiers' suggestions is still in the prototype phase, but once ready, it will have pattern recognition to be able to do some matchmaking and allow soldiers to connect ideas with similar intent, McKinney said. The idea is to have a pipeline intake process so that we can decide more centrally what we will invest in. It definitely sounds like something blockchain related, and I will be talking about the blockchain further into this video. The crux of participative force development is digital advancement through experimentation, drawing out ideas from soldiers, and facilitating more collaboration with the private sector on technological solutions at a stage in defense procurement, where the military and industry do not typically engage. So, and it says, borrowing a page from this particular playbook, where the DVOC playbook, where company employees had to disperse and work remotely yet still adhere to corporate command. The trial sought to replicate that on the battlefield. And in May, and this is 2023, and in May during the exercise Maple Resolve, the Army will partner with Amazon Web Services to experiment with the provision of a tactical network as a service. For the first time, the opposition force, played by the 12th Regiment Blinded de Canada, will operate with a digitized C2 network as it confronts the rest of 5 Canadian Mechanized Brigade Group. What we are trying to get out of it is lessons learned, McKinney explained, that can inform the Army's land C4ISR projects. We are going to deliver a tactical effect for Maple Resolve, but really the strategic goal is to help us figure out what the healthy mix of partnership with industry is going to look like in the future. How much of a solution do we want to be with industry as a service, and how much do we truly need to own ourselves? Expanded experimentation is an effort to break from the historical pattern of asking industry for a specific solution to an Army problem. Instead, the Army is hoping that by exposing industry directly to its problem space, the collaboration will identify approaches or solutions more quickly than either might have developed on their own. So, 0-day interoperability, or actually, sorry, I'm going to read a little bit here. The application, just how far the Army is prepared to go in the application of technology through contracted services is still being debated in wider national defense circles, but there is a desire to expand the space in which industry can operate. The military will need to own the kill web, said McKinney, but the Army is open to software infrastructure and other areas as a service. These are part of the ongoing discussions, he said. And here, basically, moving forward, the 6 projects are central. Which 6 projects in particular? It mentions here, well, you guys can read the article for yourself if you'd like. Sorry for my stumbling a little bit here. The 6 projects are central to harnessing the Army's data. However, the strategy flags interoperability with allies, and in particular the ability to share raw data. And as a potential stumbling block through NATO working groups, the ABCANS armies, which is American, British, Canadian, Australian, and New Zealand, frameworks and experiments like Project Convergence and Bold Quest. The Army hopes to remain in step with a digital pace of partners who are rapidly advancing their goals. Right. So, and it also mentions digital transformation at the tactical edge will be an ever-evolving effort as the technology changes. While there is no end state, the Army does envision a desired state of revolutionized decision action cycles through new uses of data and the ability to integrate, synchronize, and visualize land domain effects within a larger pan-domain context. For soldiers operating at the tactical edge, one of the objectives of the strategy is to have unprecedented agency from the field force on their own digital tool set, said Demers, setting them firmly as vital digital contributors in the broader domain scale. And then, of course, here is Quest, like I was just exploring, and it mentions the Internet of Things layer, tactical edge data, and mentions a team awareness kit and enterprise command and control gateway layer. And then it goes on to mention here networked motors in particular, and talks about Quest's attack equipped integrated fires module mounted on several mortars and generated call for fire messages via Quest's attack-based dynamic call for fires application, shared in real time with a fire direction center and a fires support coordination center. We are supporting a mortar platoon, but really enabling a digital fires network, explained Rick Bowes, strategic advisor for Quest digitization and counter-threat projects. And showcasing our integration capabilities, Quest also demonstrated a preliminary application programming interface between the soon-to-be adopted brigade-level C2 software, Citaware HQ, and Attack. This level of integration also enables NATO interoperability for the Canadian Army, given the continued adoption of Citaware and Attack by many NATO nations. Through a Starlink-based uplink and an MPU-5-based high-bandwidth mobile ad hoc network, we are able to bring in intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance imagery from a drone camera and share that throughout the network on the range, he said. He also integrated Thales, Sophie handheld thermal imagers and target locator into Attack so that we could take geotagged imagery into Attack, which was part of the call for fires message, which was then shared instantaneously throughout the network. And going to move forward. Just give me 1 second. So what happens is the Canadian Army Joint Terminal Attack controllers walked away from the ramp check tables at both Quest 19 and Finland this spring. The eyes of many envious allies were on them. This is from January of 2022. And in 2017, the Army acquired the first Android-based version of a digitally aided close air support system under a $4 million contract with Collins Aerospace. Now, the Canadians were among 70 JTACs from 16 nations, putting their systems through a test and validation process as part of a multinational joint fires interoperability demonstration sponsored by the United States Joint Staff. So, we're going to talk a little bit about Collins Aerospace here, being that the Canadian military partners with them. So, it says here that at Collins Aerospace, we're working side by side with our customers and partners to dream, design, and deliver solutions that redefine the future of our industry. By reaching across the markets we serve and drawing on our vast portfolio of expertise, we are making the most powerful concepts in aerospace a reality every day. Explore all the ways we're redefining aerospace with one of the deepest capabilities sets and broadest perspectives in our industry. And it mentions autonomous operations, cabin experience, connected battle space, electrified aircraft, sustainability, digital and technology, acceleration, etc., etc. So, next link, digital transformation. So, Collins Aerospace is reimagining the way we deliver solutions. So together with our customers, we can dream, design, and deliver like ever before. We're integrating cutting-edge technology into every aspect of business operations, from design and manufacturing to maintenance and supply chain management. Our digital transformation is streamlining processes, improving efficiency, and enhancing the overall customer experience around the globe. And then you see strengthen and secure the digital foundation, drive operational excellence, strategic utilization of data, and digitize product life cycle. And then here is Canada. I just want to say that Collins Aerospace in Ottawa specializes in design, development, support, modeling, and simulation of wireless ad hoc networking technologies for tactical applications used by Canadian Navy, coalition partners around the world, and the Canadian Army. The Ottawa facility also serves as a focal point for Collins systems, services, and repairs for Government of Canada customers. Collins also maintains a substantial systems engineering presence in Montreal, providing systems engineering services to Bombardier, one of the world's largest commercial and business aircraft manufacturers. So, back to talking about Quest Microsystems. It mentions that the milestone of the integration of the company's tactical awareness situation control system, integrated fires module for the 81mm mortar fire control system into the Android Tactical Assault Kit. This was all kind of talked about in the Canadian Armed Forces magazine I was reading. The preeminent battlefield management system for NATO countries. And as a result, the company will now proceed the next phase of the contract. And it mentions that Taxes is designed to integrate into battlefield management application, said Jeff McLeod, who is the former president and CEO. This is just slightly dated. However, ATTACK is the foremost and ubiquitous NATO battlefield management application. Therefore, we view the successful integration of TAC's application into ATTACK as key to widespread adoption of our TAC system, and we are pleased to have this milestone event. And also as well, so this is the current CEO right here. His name is Sean Hamuth, I guess. Sorry for the pronunciation. Since joining Quest as CFO, it was clear that Sean brought the kind of skills and experience to take on a more senior role, said David Luxton, which is a Quest executive chairman. His versatile background and acumen across finance, capital markets, investor relations, operational execution, and strategic corporate development with emerging public companies makes him ideally suited to the key leadership role. It also means continuity in the business at a time when Quest is building momentum and ramping up expansion in both its defense and public safety business units. So Moving forward, going to talk about some of its institutional holders here, which is interesting because, so you have different holders here. Normally you see BlackRock, Vanguard, or State Street. However, in this particular case you don't. BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street pretty well, or one of the three, have shares in pretty much every corporation that you can find, and I can only speak for what's publicly held, not any privately held things, as you cannot view who the institutional holders are with privately held organizations such as the World Economic Forum or the United Nations. But what I will say is that the Royal Bank of Canada and Bank of America Corporation. One of RBC's holders include Vanguard, and Bank of America Corporation includes Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street. So once again, if BlackRock, Vanguard, or State Street are not directly listed here, then one of these institutional holders, there are shares of BlackRock, Vanguard, or State Street within one of the institutional holders. So I'm going to go back to the Canadian Army magazine and read a few more pages there. I'm going to go to page 38, and it's titled Pushing Smart Geospatial Data to the Tactical Edge. And it says, in 2006, a series of storms swept across BC, flooding, landslides, and bringing heavy snowstorms. And on December 14th and 15th, weather appeared to be calming. A devastating windstorm that exceeded 150 kilometers per hour uprooted old-growth trees, left more than 250,000 residents without power, and caused $100 million in damage. And Matthew Primo, a combat engineer, was deployed as a chief geospatial officer as part of the Canadian Armed Forces response to assist the region, and over 3 months he and others on his team drove and walked hard drives and CD-ROMs between municipal and provincial government offices and agencies to share maps and data about conditions on the ground. Flash forward 15 years to November 2021, when 2 atmospheric rivers caused massive flooding, mudslides, and landslides, destroyed infrastructure in 17 regional districts in the province. Data flowed seamlessly between governments, emergency management agencies, and the Canadian Armed Forces. Even residents using Google Maps knew almost instantly which roads were impassable. And basically, when it comes to domestic operations, he believes Canadian Joint Operations Command has quote, cracked the nut of collecting, analyzing, and presenting data to provide commanders and emergency management agencies with the situational awareness needed to help Canadians in distress caused by natural disasters. So, though the Canadian Armed Forces has expanded its sensing ability over the past decade with small, uncrewed aerial systems, medium-range radars, and other capabilities, Primo contends the area is trailing key allies when it comes to integrating and sharing data, and when it comes to the ability to visualize a complex problem with our allies and then make decisions. We have not evolved with our allies, he said. There is potential to do so now. So, the power of the map. Most data has a spatial component. When well organized and displayed, the data doesn't just answer questions, it can tell a comprehensive story. And a good map, whether paper or on a screen, can provide a common operating picture with data points displayed. There is a level of comfort in that, Primo acknowledged, but it falls well short of the geospatial information and intelligence that can be pushed to the tactical edge. Ultimately, a soldier in combat is trying to reduce ambiguity, trying to figure out what's the known from the unknown, he said. The map and its geography is one of the key knowns. I am here, The enemy is probably here. I can flank them this way or see them that way and probably fire from there. Maps provide a rational framework that allows a soldier to visualize. It's a key technology, explained Primo, a geospatial officer and former commanding officer of the mapping and charting establishment. We haven't cracked the code on greater visualization. The assumption that a paper map is sufficient is grossly outdated given the ability to integrate all the sensors we have. It's not suggesting soldiers ditch their maps, but what you want is that visual digital display with smart data that can indicate where sensors are located, share imagery from a UAS, or perhaps alert soldiers to their range from enemy artillery. That is all possible, said Primo, who also serves as a design thinking advisor and facilitator for national security organizations. We have not designed the mindset or backbone to support this yet. And this is a picture of Vice Admiral Bob Osterlony, if people are curious. This is the effort of the Army's digital team. When Primo talks of geospatial information enabling the lethality of survivability of a battle group or combat team in adaptive dispersed operations, the Army's future operating concept, he draws on U.S. General, who's now retired, Stanley McChrystal's team of teams model for nimble innovation and business operation. A shared consciousness of data is key to empowering the execution of ADO. It sounds to me like Internet of bio-nano things is what this ultimately sounds like to me. And then it mentions iStar capabilities as well, particular program to modernize sensors, intelligent surveillance, target acquisition, and reconnaissance capabilities, but for geospatial and other data to be most valuable at that tactical edge, the headquarters elements like a combat team will require resident resources such as servers, processors, tools, and integrated sensors connected to a more resilient cloud-based architecture when available, but also able to work with individual troops when denied or disconnected with the same data and applications. He equated possibilities for iStar with the modern capabilities of a delivery service like FedEx or Canada Post. What used to be a manual process to track and deliver packages is now almost completely digital and, where feasible, automated. And then it talks about Project Convergence, which I'll probably be saving for another video because this is already quite lengthy and that's like an essay in and of itself. The digital strategy notes disruptive potential a shift to everything as a service could have on the military, but as the digital solutions industry undergoes a significant pivot from physical products to a service model, the Army should aim to alleviate resources by outsourcing where applicable. To get this right and identify the most effective solutions in a rapidly evolving digital ecosystem considers the advances of AI in just a few months. Primo recommends several steps, starting with envisioning solutions together with academia, industry, and defense scientists that answer the big question about the Army's challenges, such as interoperability and the types of capabilities soldiers and headquarters require. So I think I've read about enough of that. I'm going to just go to page 44. And it mentions competitive projects, the Defense R&D Canada-led innovation for defense excellence and security program. I'm going to go over that very briefly because that is actually a part of the Department of Defense. And in the call with Beaudry, He asked if the biodigital convergence was a part of D&D, and I said that I wasn't sure, but now I'm definitively sure. Innovation for defense excellence and security is more than just a funding program. We're accelerating concepts and propelling solutions forward, building a defense innovation ecosystem. So this is Defense and Research Development Canada. They're Canada's science, technology, and innovation leader, trusted advisor, collaborative partner, and knowledge integrator for defense and security. We develop and deliver new technical solutions and advice to the Department of National Defense, Canadian Armed Forces, other federal departments, and the safety and security community. We also work with partners in academia, government, and industry, and with Canada's allies. So, who is the minister of this? Well, you have Dr. Jess Printer Comal, who graduated from this in the University of Montreal in Quebec, and he has a degree in veterinary medicine and a postgraduate degree in veterinary microbiology. He began his veterinary career specializing in small animals in a practice in eastern townships in the province of Quebec, and he joined the public service as a veterinary inspector as well as a laboratory supervisor at Atlantic Canada, and in 2000 Dr. Kamal and his family moved to Ottawa, where he held various positions of increasing responsibility within the Canadian Food Inspection Agency and other departments such as Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada and Health Canada. Over the course of his long career, Dr. Kamal has gained extensive and diversified experience as a senior scientific leader, having advanced key government of Canada priorities and building collaborative partnerships with government, academia, and industry. So, and then he is the Assistant Deputy Minister, Defense Research and Development Canada, Department of National Defense. So there we go. We have D&D involved with the biodigital convergence. So this is an article about the blockchain within the Canadian Armed Forces. I am just going to read page 4 and 5, or at least parts of it. Recent innovative technologies have pushed companies into new supply chain models driven by digital ecosystems. The globalization, widespread availability, and cost-effectiveness of IT and digital services and advances in transportation have reshaped the supply chain and logistics industries. As such, the supply network expanded to multiple sectors that can be located in different regions and enabled hybrid forms of cooperation and competition. Consequently, supply chains today are often complex distributed networks. In addition, most companies are adopting digitalization and are developing different IT platforms to connect inventory databases, warehouses, and order management systems with web shops and external fulfillment and logistics services, while tracking what the competition is offering. The complex distributed supply networks with diverse stakeholders that may have competing or conflicting interests and numerous third-party intermediaries. The integration of blockchain technology with distributed supply networks can increase efficiency by reducing bureaucracy and automated services, and could automate in a secure manner the business transactions while allowing for the tracking of products from origin to store shelf. Blockchain technology promises to deliver tremendous business value by increasing supply chain transparency and reducing risk. From a military's perspective, aided by digitalization, blockchain has the potential to securely connect battle spaces and profoundly change command and control and the conduct of operations. Moreover, it enables a single real-time secure information system that is accessible to all those involved in supply chains transactions. So then it goes on to just kind of describe what the blockchain is a ledger system essentially. So I'm going to skip reading this, but once again, the links are in the description. And here is another blockchain related article that people should probably read through as well. And then I'm going to just say here quite quickly, I've used this article in prior videos, but I don't really like the term 15-minute city. It's slang, but it's called a smart city is what it is. And that smart city, people market the metaverse to look like this, when in reality it would actually look more like something like this. And in this regard, talking about climate change as the town of Goderich markets here, climate change is just actually an excuse for being able to use different sensors on different things, down to a blade of grass, trees, and animals and people as well, and twin those in a digital environment known as the metaverse. So, and the blockchain is what is used as a ledger system in order to keep track of activity, if you will. So, with this all being said, it's really actually detrimental to anybody's freedoms of sorts, this metaverse type of environment, and we do need to have an ethics committee to remove the smart infrastructure, if you will, in order to stop this agenda from coming to fruition. So I'm going to go over some of the native treaties here, and we're going to start with the J Treaty. It says, since 1794, Aboriginal peoples have been guaranteed the right to trade and travel across the U.S. and Canada, which was then a territory of Britain. The right is recognized in Article 3 of the J Treaty, also known as the Treaty of Amity, Commerce, and Navigation of 1794, and subsequent laws that stem from the J Treaty. So it mentions what you have a right to, do not have a right to, and what the U.S. government cannot do. You have a right to cross the U.S. and Canadian border freely, live and work in the U.S., and be eligible for public benefits, and register for college or university in the U.S. as a domestic student rather than a foreign student. And also you do not have the right to be processed for an alien registration card, obtain a work permit, or register for the military, and the U.S. government cannot deport you, exclude you from entry, or deny you services. The next treaty is the Two-Row Wampum. So the Two-Row Wampum, introduced in 1613, the Mohawks noticed people coming into their territory unannounced, and the visitors had begun to cut trees and clear land for their homes and farms. They had entered the lands of the Haudenosaunee and were now occupying some of the empty rooms or land. The newcomers dressed oddly and had hair on their faces. They had iron pots and pans and had their families with them. These people needed a place to live. The Mohawks sent a runner to Onondaga to convene a meeting of the Haudenosaunee. At the meeting, it was discussed that a delegation must travel to where these people had settled to determine their intentions. It was difficult for the delegation. The people they met spoke in a language they hadn't heard before. It took much time and patience for the two people to begin to communicate, and after many discussions, it was decided that the Haudenosaunee and the Europeans must have a way to greet each other when they meet. The settlers, with their large sailed boat, thought they should be called father, and the Haudenosaunee son. The Haudenosaunee said, "This would not do. We shall address each other as brothers. This shows we are equal to each other." As the Haudenosaunee and Dutch discovered much about each other, an agreement was made as to how they would treat each other and live together. Each of their ways would be known in the purple rose running the length of a wampum belt. In one row is a ship with our white brothers' ways, in the other a canoe with our ways. Each will travel down the river of life side by side. Neither will attempt to steer the other's vessel. The Haudenosaunee and Dutch agreed on three principles to make their treaties last. The first was friendship. The Haudenosaunee and their white brothers will live in friendship. The second is peace. And the final is the agreement will last forever. The Dutch recorded this agreement on paper with 3 silver chains. Iron chains would not do because iron rusts and breaks over time. Silver, on the other hand, can be polished and renewed when the brothers meet. The Haudenosaunee and the Dutch agreed to call this the Silver Covenant Chain of Friendship. And so the Haudenosaunee explained to the Dutch that they did not use paper to record their history. They would make belts made of white and purple wampum belts. The Haudenosaunee made a belt to record this agreement. The belt has 2 purple rows running alongside each other representing 2 boats. One boat is the canoe with the Haudenosaunee way of life, laws, and people. The other is the Dutch ship with their laws, religion, and people in it. The boats will travel side by side down the river of life. Each nation will respect the ways of each other and will not interfere with the other. Together we will travel in friendship and in peace forever, as long as the grass is green, as long as the water runs downhill, as long as the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, and as long as our Mother Earth will last. Poetic and well-spoken words. And the dish with 1 spoon. It is also known as 1 dish, 1 spoon, is a law that has been established since 1142 CE to describe an agreement for sharing hunting territory among 2 or more nations. People are all eating out of the single dish. That is all hunting in the shared territory. 1 spoon signifies that all peoples sharing the territory are expected to limit the game they take to leave enough for others, and the continued abundance and viability of the hunting grounds into the future. Sometimes the native language word is rendered in English as bowl or kettle rather than dish. So I'm going to talk about Find a Spring. This website here in particular has the locations of all natural springs around the world. Bear in mind that some of them are on private property and that kind of a thing. So, and the location is not always exact, so you'll have to copy and paste the location into a GPS or find it yourself. So, it is important that we form ethics committees and get rid of the smart infrastructure. We uphold the 3 native treaties, the Jay Treaty, the 2-row wampum, and 1 dish, 1 spoon, because they are just as equally important for the quote-unquote white man as they are important for the native. So they need to be upheld for us to be able to live prosperously and for us to live peacefully and coexist. Also, we need to be able to secure the fresh water sources. Thank you everyone for watching. Take care.